Well, good day. Last week on September 30th, Canada observed National Truth and Reconciliation Day, also called Orange Shirt Day, to honor the survivors and the children who never came home from our government's residential schools, which kidnapped and tortured First Nations children up until as recently as the 1970s. At school in Quebec, we were taught some parts of the Indigenous history, tribe names like Mi'kmaq or Iroquois, Huron, Algonquin, Mohawk, Inuit, and others, many of which our regions are named after. In fact, the name of our country most likely comes from the Huron Iroquois name Kanata, meaning a village or a settlement. We learned about Louis Riel, too, the rebel leader of the French and Indigenous Red River Métis people who fought to make Manitoba a province, and he's now honored with Louis Riel Day.
Red River Métis are proud of our history of strength and resilience, which helped bring Manitoba into Canada's Confederation. As a nation, we thank you for honoring Louis Riel this February, and we encourage everyone to learn about Manitoba's first premier and the history of the Red River Métis. MMF, the national government of the Red River Métis, wishes all Manitobans the very best, as family and friends gather to embrace the pride of our beautiful province.
My best friend growing up was Métis. Their family accepted me as one of their own and taught me a lot, especially their father. I followed him around and pestered him with questions about his garden and sampled his cooking whenever I could. He made the best pickles. He would take us out on excursions to gather wild garlic and berries, and we'd go hunting for garnets in the pink rocks of the Gatineau Hills. His son would bravely dive into the rushing waters of the Chaudière Rapids. And when he became a police officer, he rode down our street on a huge police horse to show his dad and mom and all the kids on the block. Well, as much as I love to remember that idealized childhood, I've since come to realize all of the sacrifices my protege made to conform to European standards of society. Work hard at a job, making money for the company, pay government taxes, ruin your health with cigarettes and booze, and watch it all happen to your children after you. Who wouldn't want to conform? Well, I was not aware of residential schools growing up, but I did notice when the first Indigenous students arrived at our high school in the mid-70s. I didn't know where they came from or if they'd previously been held in one of those shameful places, but I was aware of their silence and their guarded eyes and watchful postures when passing them in the hallways, and it gave me a painful sensation I couldn't describe, but I knew that our system had failed them already. The residential schools were a means for the Crown to carry out a silent genocide of Indigenous people in Canada without going to the expense and bother of a war. They made them disappear. Families had no rights, and even if they assimilated, they were discriminated against, unseen, unheard, and filled with generational trauma. Sound familiar, my American friends? British colonial rule began after the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, which lasted from 1756 to 1763 and resulted in the conquest of what was then known as New France, ending with the Treaty of Paris. To paraphrase from Reddit user T1M3KN1GHT, when the British took over the colony from France, part of the deal for governing Lower and Upper Canada involved navigating the complex relationships of the formerly French colony, forcing the British to make concessions to the Francophone population and deal diplomatically with Indigenous peoples, lest they suffer an uprising that jeopardized their hold on their new territory. To meet the colonial agenda, assimilation and negotiation were preferred over conflict. Signing treaties with Indigenous peoples gave the British increased leeway over laying claim to Indigenous territory concerning the broader Canadian Dominion, while also allowing ample wiggle room for exploitation of resources within those territories. Cultural assimilation began through the passing of acts that gave sovereignty over Indigenous culture to Canadian government without having to consult Indigenous peoples meaningfully. Some historians theorize that through gradual cultural erosion, the Canadian government hoped that in the long run, Indigenous peoples would cease to exist, and along with that, the need to honor treaties. Much of the conflict between the government of Canada and Indigenous communities today is a byproduct of failing to commit to cultural genocide, with Indigenous peoples mobilizing to hold the Canadian government to account for deals it signed but declined to fulfill. For more on the subject, they recommend the following books.
The Battle of the Plains of Abraham isn't just about generals and strategies. It's also about the people who lived through it. One story is that of James Wolfe. Before the battle, Wolfe reportedly told his officers that he'd rather die fighting for victory than live without glory. His death on the battlefield turned him into a British hero, but it also symbolized the high cost of war. Another perspective comes from the French civilians in Quebec City, who endured incredible hardships during the British siege. Food shortages, bombardments, and fear of the unknown were constant challenges. Even though they weren't soldiers, they were deeply affected by the battle and its aftermath. And let's not forget the Indigenous allies of both the French and the British. Many Indigenous nations were drawn into the conflict because of alliances and promises made by the European powers. While they fought bravely, the outcome of the war ultimately changed their lives and lands forever.
In 1969, Pierre Elliott Trudeau and his Minister of Indian Affairs, Jacques Chrétien, proposed the truly awful policy known as the White Paper. Instead of amending the Indian Act, the government decided to simply abolish it.
A forceful spokesperson was Harold Cardinal, the 24-year-old Cree man who headed up the Indian Association of Alberta. Cardinal called the White Paper a thinly disguised program of extermination through assimilation. He saw the White Paper as a form of cultural genocide. In 1970, the Indian Association of Alberta, under Cardinal's leadership, rejected the White Paper in their document Citizens Plus, which became popularly known as the Red Paper. Citizens Plus was soon adopted as the national Indian stance on the White Paper. Quoting the document, Aboriginal organizations across Canada agreed, "There is nothing more important than our treaties, our lands, and the well-being of our future generations." In British Columbia, the controversy over the White Paper sparked a new period of political organizing. With the White Paper as a focal point, First Nations across the province came together in new ways. They were spearheaded by a younger generation of leaders who, like Cardinal, were university-educated and politically savvy. In November 1969, 3 Aboriginal leaders, Rose Charlie of the Indian Homemakers Association, Philip Paul of the Southern Vancouver Island Tribal Federation, and Don Moses of the North American Indian Brotherhood, invited bands across British Columbia to a conference in Kamloops where they could develop a collective response to the White Paper and discuss the ongoing fight for recognition of Aboriginal title and rights. Representatives from 140 bands attended the conference, at that point the largest meeting ever of the province's Aboriginal leaders. The Kamloops Conference led to the formation of a new provincial organization, the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs, UBCIC, whose main focus was the resolution of land claims. The UBCIC's A Declaration of Indian Rights, the BC Indian Position Paper, or Brown Paper, of 1979, rejected the 1969 White Paper's proposals and asserted that Aboriginal peoples continued to hold Aboriginal title to the land. The Brown Paper would become the cornerstone of UBCIC's policy.
Canada's efforts in recent years towards truth and reconciliation still have a long way to go. But in 2007, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, came about through a legal settlement between residential schools survivors, the Assembly of First Nations, Inuit representatives, and the parties responsible for creation and operation of the schools, the federal government, and the church bodies. Its mandate was to be transparent and to inform all Canadians of the truth behind these schools, and documented the stories of the survivors and the families, the communities, and anyone affected by the experiences, to include First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, former residential school students, their families, communities, the churches, former school employees, government officials, and other Canadians. The TRC concluded its mandate in 2015 and transferred its records to the safekeeping of National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, NCTR. National events were held across Canada to raise awareness and educate the public about them. And in addition, the TRC supported community events designed by individual communities to meet their unique needs. The TRC was also advised by a 10-member Indian Residential School Survivor Committee made up of residential school survivors from across Canada. The TRC supported a commemoration initiative that provided funding for activities that honor and pay tribute in a permanent and lasting manner to former residential school students. Many of those students are elderly, so there's a need to record their stories for future generations, and there's still other voices sharing their insight into those days and the schools and the indifference of our society towards them. September 30 is also known as Orange Shirt Day to honor those lost children. At memorials across the country, children's shoes and toys are left as offering to their innocent souls.
It is 5 years since the Truth and Reconciliation Day, statutory holiday took place, and this is the 4th year of the South Island powwow here. Nations have gathered here from across the island, BC, and other parts of Canada, all in the spirit of reconciliation. And today was really about talking to allies, spending time with those who are non-Indigenous, trying to learn more and be on their own specific personal path towards reconciliation. The drums are pounding through the bodies of both the performers and spectators at this year's 4th annual South Island Powwow. Thousands of people gathered at Royal Athletic Park to both celebrate and remember residential school survivors and those that never made it home. At the strike of noon, dancers and delegates kicked off the gathering with a grand entry, the official start symbolizing unity and pride.
It's like a sea of orange, and to me it feels like a sea of love.
Although some hearts weigh heavy, spirits are also high with a sense of warmth that's been given to them by those attending.
Survivors can also carry a feeling of guilt about the ones who didn't make it out. Let's hope we can continue to move in the right direction, even though we're not doing so great and aren't really consulting or keeping bargains over land and water rights. The children will remember, though. Thanks for watching, and as the Anishinaabe people say, miigwech.
Hey, yeah, you. Before you click away to watch someone unbox a tactical toothbrush, let's talk about something real. Political Drain isn't just another content mill. We're a digital front in a very real war. Not with bullets, but with ideas, with action, and with solidarity. We pair urgent news with critical education. And we build community around actual resistance, not the hashtag kind. The kind that moves. But here's the thing. None of this is free. It isn't. Behind every video is time, labor, research, and some weird guy asking if we're gonna pay the hosting bill. And yeah, some of that money goes to things we can't necessarily say out loud. If you know, you know. Let's just say our special ops aren't Call of Duty LARPers. They're people making real moves to protect, uplift, and organize. You're not just funding a channel. You're funding a resistance network in a world where capital still calls the shots. Unfortunately, in a system built on artificial scarcity, even mutual aid has a price tag. And if we want to grow, if we want to win, we need your help. We need your help. So if you've got even a few bucks to spare, toss it our way. It's not for ads, it's not for merch drops, but for people making moves in the shadows so others can do it in the light. It's just us and you. So fund the mission, fund the fight, fund the future, because nobody's coming to save us. We save each other. That's how this works. Follow us on all these things you see here, and our link tree is in the description. Maybe even get some merch.